I never thought I'd see the day when police would roll up to our secluded mountain cabin, hands on their holsters, ordering my wife to step outside with her hands visible. 2 deputies stood on our wraparound porch, faces set like stone, as they informed us they'd received a report of criminal trespassing and breaking and entering, and there she was, behind them, Karen Peaton. Smirking, self-satisfied, her blazer glittering with HOA president pins. The most power-hungry woman in Pine Ridge County. Officers? My wife Sarah said evenly, though I saw the slight tremor in her hands. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is our property, Karen stepped forward, voice dripping with false concern. These people have been squatting in this cabin for weeks. As president of the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA, I have documentation showing this property falls under our jurisdiction. They haven't filed the required paperwork or paid their association fees. The lead deputy, a tall man with graying temples, turned to Sarah. Ma'am, we're going to need to see proof of ownership. Mrs. Patton reported that you broke into this property earlier today. Without hesitation, Sarah reached into her back pocket and unfolded a document. Here's a certified copy of the deed, officer. The property was transferred to my name 3 months ago when my Uncle Robert passed away. My name is right there, Sarah Mitchell, sole owner. I watched Karen's face shift like storm clouds over the mountains. The smugness drained away first, replaced by confusion, then outright panic. The deputy studied the deed carefully, then turned back to her with barely concealed irritation. Mrs. Peaton, this deed clearly lists Mrs. Mitchell as the legal owner. Can you explain why you reported her for trespassing on her own property? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. There must be... The HOA records show, but we weren't done yet. This was only the beginning of Karen Peaton's spectacular downfall. 3 months earlier, Sarah and I had sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Denver, still reeling from the news. Her Uncle Robert, a forest ranger for 40 years, had left her his pride and joy, a beautiful log cabin on 5 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness, with lake access and mountain views that could make a grown man weep. The property is free and clear, the attorney had said, sliding the papers across his mahogany desk. No liens, no mortgages. According to these records, it sits on private land predating any homeowners association in the area. We'd driven up that first weekend, hearts full of excitement and a truck packed with supplies. The cabin was everything we'd dreamed of, rustic yet well-maintained, with a grand stone fireplace in the living room and windows that framed the Rockies like living paintings. We spent the first day exploring, planning a vegetable garden, even talking about a deck extension. That's when we noticed them. Small, discreet placards at the edges of the property reading, Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA, community standards enforced. Sarah frowned. Uncle Robert never mentioned an HOA, I'd shrugged. Probably for those new developments down the hill. This place has been in your family since the 60s. How wrong I was. How spectacularly wrong. Our first encounter with Karen came exactly a week later. Sarah and I were hauling old lumber from a collapsed shed when a white Lexus SUV, spotless despite the mountain roads, pulled up our gravel drive. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s. Blonde hair shellacked into a helmet that looked hurricane-proof. "Excuse me," she called out, voice sharp and commanding. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Karen Peaton, president of the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA. I straightened, wiping my hands on my jeans. Nice to meet you. I'm James Mitchell, and this is my wife Sarah. We just inherited this place from her uncle. Karen's eyes narrowed. She whipped out an iPad, scrolling through it with manicured nails. Mitchell. I don't see any transfer paperwork filed with the HOA. You are aware that all property transfers must be approved by the board, correct? Sarah stepped forward, jaw set in that familiar way that warned me trouble was brewing. With all due respect, Mrs. Payton, this property belonged to my Uncle Robert for over 40 years. It's private land, Karen laughed, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, honey, that's what they all say. Every property within 5 miles of Pine Ridge Lake falls under our jurisdiction. Now, I already see several violations. That lumber pile is an eyesore. It needs to go. Your grass is 2 inches over regulation height. And is that a bird feeder? Those attract rodents. Strictly prohibited. She tapped furiously at her iPad. I'll send you the new resident packet, but you'll need to attend next month's board meeting to get approval for your occupancy. There's a $5,000 transfer fee, and your annual dues of $3,000 are already past due. Before either of us could respond, she was back in her Lexus, vanishing in a cloud of dust and self-importance. Over the following weeks, her visits became a recurring nightmare. She'd appear at random hours, tablet in hand, citing new violations. Our firewood wasn't stacked per HOA guidelines. The American flag on our porch was the wrong size. Our truck was too old and lowered property values. "This is harassment," Sarah fumed one evening after Karen had spent 20 minutes berating us over our unapproved mailbox. Uncle Robert never dealt with any of this nonsense. I pulled out my laptop. Let's find out why. What I discovered was illuminating. The Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA had only been established 8 years ago, covering a cluster of new McMansions on the South Shore. Our cabin, however, sat on the North Shore, up a private road dating back to the 1950s. "Look at this," I showed Sarah. "According to county records, our property isn't part of any HOA. We're zoned rural residential, not within the planned community." Sarah's eyes lit up. "So she has no authority over us?" "None whatsoever." The next time Karen showed up, we were ready. She marched up the driveway with a stack of papers, face set in righteous fury. "I've been more than patient," she declared, thrusting them toward me. "These are your formal citations, $3,000 in fines for multiple violations. You've also been scheduled for a disciplinary hearing next Tuesday." I didn't take the papers. "Mrs. Peaton, we've done our research. This property isn't part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here." Her face went crimson. "That's where you're wrong. I've been president of this HOA for 6 years. I know where our boundaries lie. Your uncle may have gotten away with ignoring the rules because of his age, but you two don't get a free pass." Sarah stepped closer. "We'd like to see the official HOA maps showing our property within your boundaries." Karen's jaw tightened. "Those are confidential documents. Only board members have access. Then we'll request them from the county," I said evenly. "In the meantime, stop coming onto our property uninvited. It's trespassing." Karen's laugh sliced through the air, sharp and bitter. "Trespassing? I'm conducting official HOA business. But fine, if that's how you want to play it. Don't come crying to me when the sheriff's department gets involved." She stormed back to her car, but not before snapping several photos of our property. The pit in my stomach told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. 3 weeks later, the situation exploded. I'd driven back to Denver for a work meeting, leaving Sarah at the cabin to keep working on our renovations. She planned to spend the day painting the kitchen cabinets, a task we'd put off since moving in. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. But the first thing I heard wasn't her voice. It was the static of a police radio and the murmur of male voices. "James." Sarah's tone was steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "You need to come back." Karen called the police and told them I broke into the cabin. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I merged onto the highway. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" "I'm fine," she said. "The deputies are here and I showed them the deed." "But James, she told them I was a dangerous squatter. They had their hands on their weapons when they approached me. That drive back was the longest 90 minutes of my life." When I finally pulled up, 2 sheriff's vehicles were parked beside Karen's white Lexus. Sarah stood on the porch with the deputies, holding documents while Karen lingered off to the side, arms crossed and foot tapping with impatient arrogance. "Officer," I said as I walked up, forcing calm despite the anger burning in my chest. "I'm James Mitchell, Sarah's husband. Can someone explain what's going on here?" The lead deputy, who introduced himself as Deputy Harrison, looked worn out and irritated. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Peaton here called 911 claiming your wife had broken into this property. She presented documents stating it was under HOA control and that you were trespassing." I turned to Karen. She lifted her chin, defiant. "However," Harrison continued, "your wife provided clear proof of ownership. The deed's in her name and was properly filed with the county 3 months ago." "This is ridiculous," Karen snapped. "They haven't paid HOA fees or attended any meetings. They're in complete violation of—" "Ma'am," the deputy interrupted, his patience fraying. Whether they're part of your HOA is a civil issue. What concerns me is that you placed a false 911 call reporting a break-in. That's a misuse of emergency services. Karen's face drained of color. I genuinely believe the HOA records show... Show what exactly? Sarah cut in, her voice low and dangerous. That you've been harassing homeowners who aren't even in your association? Or that you've been trespassing on our property for weeks? Let's all calm down, said Harrison, raising a hand. Mrs. Payton, I strongly advise you to verify your HOA boundaries before filing another complaint. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell. If she continues, you can submit a harassment report with our office. As the deputies prepared to leave, Harrison pulled me aside. Between you and me, he said quietly, this isn't the first time we've had issues with Mrs. Payton and her HOA. You might want to talk to your neighbors. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sun slip behind the mountains. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only a cold resolve. We can't let this go, Sarah said firmly. She could have gotten me shot. What if I hadn't had the deed? What if they'd believed her? I nodded, already forming a plan. First thing tomorrow, we're installing cameras. Every inch, Sarah agreed. And we need a lawyer, a good one who knows property law and HOA disputes. Over the next week, we shifted from victims to investigators. 8 high-definition security cameras went up, covering every angle of our land, complete with night vision. Then we started knocking on doors. What we uncovered was staggering. Tom and Ellen Brewster, who lived half a mile down the road, shared their own nightmare. She tried to fine us $3,000 for having the wrong color shutters, Ellen said, shaking her head. We've been here since '95, long before her HOA existed. Mike Garza, whose family had owned a lakeside cabin for 3 generations, showed us a stack of bogus fines. She keeps saying my property's part of her HOA, but I never signed anything. The county says I'm outside the boundaries, but she won't stop. The real breakthrough came from Dorothy Chen, an 80-year-old widow who used to work in the county planning department. Adjusting her glasses, she pulled out old maps. I remember when that HOA was first established, she said. The boundaries were very specific, just the new South Shore development. Everything else was grandfathered in as rural residential. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. But I've heard rumors the HOA's maps don't match the county's. Might be worth looking into. Armed with that lead, we met with attorney Patricia Hawkins, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in property disputes. She listened carefully, jotting notes as we spoke. False 911 calls, harassment, trespassing, and possibly falsified records, she summarized. Mrs. Payton's exposed herself to both civil and criminal charges. What do you recommend? I asked. Patricia's smile was predatory. We start by filing a formal complaint with the county regarding the boundary discrepancies. Then we request all documents tied to your property, from both the HOA and the county. If there's fraud, we'll find it. 2 weeks later, Patricia called with barely contained excitement. You're not going to believe this. The HOA maps don't match the county's. Someone altered them to include 40 extra properties that were never part of the original agreement. Someone meaning Karen? Sarah asked. The changes were made 2 years after she became president, Patricia confirmed. She's been collecting dues and issuing fines to people who were never in the HOA. That's not just fraud, it's racketeering. We filed our complaint with the county the next morning. The investigation moved fast. Officials interviewed homeowners, reviewed financial records, and compared multiple boundary maps. And as the truth came out, Karen's composure began to crack, her behavior growing more erratic by the day. She sent us threatening letters from the HOA's lawyer, who, as it turned out, was her brother-in-law. She organized HOA meetings specifically to discuss the Mitchell problem. She even tried to convince the local newspaper to publish a story about dangerous outsiders threatening our community values. But the evidence was overwhelming. The investigator discovered that Karen had personally altered the digital maps in the HOA's system, extending the association's boundaries to include properties that were never part of it. Over 6 years, she'd collected more than $200,000 in illegal fines and dues. The County Board of Supervisors called an emergency meeting. The small hearing room overflowed with furious homeowners, many clutching folders stuffed with bogus fines and threatening letters. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her once polished appearance showing cracks, her blazer wrinkled, her makeup smudged. The board's chairwoman didn't mince words. "Mrs. Peaton, the evidence presented shows a clear pattern of fraud and abuse of power. Effective immediately, the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA is ordered to cease and desist all activities related to properties outside its original boundaries. Furthermore, all fines and dues collected from these properties must be refunded with interest," but the board wasn't finished. "Additionally," the chairwoman continued, "this matter has been referred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. Forging official documents is a felony in this state." The sound Karen made was somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. "You can't do this! I've worked for years to maintain property values. These people don't understand what it takes to run a proper community." "Mrs. Peaton," the chairwoman replied coldly, "you've extorted money from dozens of families under false pretenses. You're lucky if fraud charges are all you're facing." The hearing room erupted in applause as sheriff's deputies escorted Karen out. But the best part came 2 weeks later, when the official charges were filed: 37 counts of fraud, 1 count of racketeering, and multiple counts of falsifying official documents. Sarah and I were sitting on our porch, enjoying a quiet evening, when the news broke. Our neighbor Tom texted, "Turn on Channel 9. You're going to want to see this." The reporter stood outside the courthouse, the wind whipping her hair. "In a stunning development," she said, "former HOA President Karen Peaton has been found guilty on all counts. The judge has sentenced her to 5 years in prison and ordered her to pay $450,000 in restitution to affected homeowners." The camera cut to footage of Karen being led away in handcuffs, her perfect facade finally, completely shattered. Her face was a mask of shock and disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how her little kingdom had crumbled so spectacularly. "I'm innocent!" she screamed at the cameras. "They don't understand. Without me, property values will plummet. The community will fall apart." But no one was listening anymore. Her reign of terror was over, ended not by revolution, but by the simple act of someone standing up and saying, "Enough." The final image before the news cut to commercial showed Karen stumbling on the courthouse steps, her heels snapping as deputies led her to a waiting police car.